After Grace passed away, Jason became my entire world. I never saw him as a burden, quite the opposite. He was the reason I found the strength to get out of bed every single morning. Jason was an exceptional child. He always ranked at the top of his class. His teachers admired him. His classmates loved him. Every parent-teacher conference ended exactly the same way. "Mr. Carter, you have an extraordinary son." Every time I heard those words, I'd smile, my heart filled with pride. I truly believed every sacrifice I had ever made was worth it. When Jason was about 12, he wanted to join the school's baseball team. The registration fee was $300. For many families, that wasn't much money, but for me, it was nearly an entire week's paycheck. That same night, I quietly volunteered for another overnight shift. For 2 straight weeks, I barely slept. The day the fee was due, I placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Jason opened it. His eyes lit up. "Dad, where did you get all this money?" I smiled. I got lucky. The truth was, the only thing I'd won was another aching back and months of constant exhaustion. But seeing my son smile made every sacrifice worthwhile. When Jason turned 16, he wanted his first car. All of his friends already had one. I knew how easily a teenage boy could feel left behind. So I sold my old motorcycle, the only thing I had ever bought just for myself. That motorcycle was the last piece of my youth. Grace had ridden behind me on it on our very first date. I wiped the dust off it, looked at it one last time, then watched it drive away with someone else. A week later, Jason received a used blue sedan. He wrapped his arms around me. "Thank you, Dad." I smiled, never telling him that the motorcycle had been with me for nearly 20 years. Jason studied finance in college. The day his acceptance letter arrived, I was happier than he was. I stood in front of Grace's photograph, smiled softly. "You see that, Grace? Our son made it." I truly believed somewhere she was smiling too. College tuition wasn't cheap. Jason once suggested taking out student loans. I shook my head. "No, I'll take care of it." I didn't want my son beginning adulthood burdened by debt. So I worked even harder. There was one year when I worked more than 300 days. A coworker asked me once, "Michael, what are you working so hard for?" I laughed. "I'm not earning this money for me. I'm earning it for my son's future." Jason graduated with honors. The day he walked across that stage to receive his diploma, he looked into the audience. Among hundreds of people, our eyes met. He raised his thumb. I raised mine back. At that moment, I honestly believed there was nothing left in my life to regret. After graduation, Jason was hired by an investment firm. The salary was excellent. The bonuses were even better. Within just a few years, he moved into a luxury apartment downtown. I couldn't have been prouder. Whenever people asked, "What does your son do?" I'd smile proudly. "He works in finance. He's far smarter than I'll ever be." Then Jason met Emily. She was beautiful, intelligent, warm, and incredibly charming. The first time she came to my house, she brought a homemade apple pie. She smiled warmly. "Jason has told me so much about you." "Thank you for raising the man he is today." I was deeply moved. I thought my son had chosen well. On their wedding day, I stood beside him and placed his hand into the hands of the woman he loved. During my speech, I said only one thing. "I don't have great wealth to leave you, but I hope you'll build a family even happier than the one I had." Jason hugged me, then whispered, "I promise." During the first few years of their marriage, they visited me often. Emily loved cooking. Jason mowed my lawn. The 3 of us shared dinner together. The little house was filled with laughter once again. I often found myself thinking this was exactly the life Grace had dreamed of. About 5 years later, everything slowly began to change. Jason became busier. His phone calls grew fewer. Our weekend dinners stopped altogether. Whenever I called, he always had an excuse.
I'm in a meeting. I'm traveling for work. Maybe next weekend.
But next weekend turned into next month, and next month into something even longer. I kept telling myself that's just how life is. Young people have careers to build. I never blamed him. In fact, I started calling less often. I didn't want to become a burden. Then one evening, Jason showed up unexpectedly. He brought a bottle of wine, a nice dinner, and the biggest smile I'd seen in months. We talked late into the night, like we used to. Then suddenly, he asked, "Dad,
is all of your retirement money still in the same account?"
I nodded. Yeah.
I've never touched it.
Jason leaned back thoughtfully, then smiled.
You should update your account records.
There are scams everywhere these days.
I work in finance. I'll help you take care of everything.
I never questioned him, not for a second. If anything, I felt fortunate because I had a son who understood the complicated things I never could. I had no idea that on that very night, a door had quietly opened, and behind it waited an abyss, a place where the son I trusted most was about to push my entire life without a single moment of hesitation. After that evening, Jason suddenly became much more attentive. At least, that's what I believed back then. He called more often, asked about my health, reminded me to take my medication. Every weekend, he insisted on picking me up to take me out for dinner. Emily usually came with us. She always smiled gently. "Dad,
you've lost weight.
You need to take better care of yourself." I looked at the two of them, and my heart was filled with gratitude. I told myself, maybe I'd worried for nothing. Maybe my son hadn't changed at all. Maybe he had simply been busy. One Sunday afternoon, Jason showed up carrying his laptop. He sat down at my kitchen table. "Dad,
I checked your retirement account.
You're still using the old verification system.
If you don't update it,
and something ever happens,
your money could be frozen."
I frowned. I don't understand any of that. Jason smiled.
"Don't worry. I'll handle everything. You just need to sign a few forms. It's standard bank paperwork."
I never questioned him. For 38 years, I had never questioned my son. He turned each page, pointing to every signature line.
"Right here and here."
I signed, without reading. Not because I was careless, but because I trusted Jason more than I trusted myself. It was the biggest mistake of my entire life. A week later, Jason came back. This time, he asked to borrow my passport, my social security card, and several personal documents.
"The bank needs to verify everything,"
he explained. I opened my desk drawer, handed him every document. Jason carefully placed them inside his briefcase.
"I'll bring them back tomorrow."
I nodded. The next day, he did exactly that. Everything was there. Nothing was missing. That only strengthened my trust. What I didn't know was that during those 24 hours, every document I owned had already been copied. Several months passed. Life seemed perfectly normal. I kept working, counting down the days, until retirement. I'd already made my plans. The following spring, I'd sell my old house, buy a smaller one. The remaining money would be enough for a quiet and comfortable life, without ever asking Jason for help. That had always been my dream, to grow old without becoming a burden to my son. Then, on a Monday morning, my phone rang. It was the bank.
"This is Michael Carter."
The woman on the line replied politely, "Mr. Carter, we're calling to confirm that you've received the full retirement fund transfer." I frowned. "What transfer?" She paused. "The funds from your retirement account were withdrawn in full 3 days ago." I laughed, a confused, almost nervous laugh. "I think you've called the wrong person. I haven't withdrawn a single dollar." Silence. Then her voice suddenly became tense.
"Please stay on the line, sir."
10 minutes later, The branch manager called me personally. He explained that every document had appeared completely legitimate. There was a signed authorization, a notarized power of attorney, copies of my identification, biometric verification, recorded according to bank procedures. I listened, but none of it made any sense. I got into my truck and drove straight to the bank. The manager placed the file on the table in front of me. I stared at it. My name, my address, my social security number, everything was correct, except for one thing. I had never signed any of it. I picked up a pen, signed my real signature, then placed it beside the forged one. At first glance, they looked almost identical, but I knew, without any doubt, that wasn't my handwriting. My hands began to shake. The bank immediately contacted its fraud investigation department. 2 days later, the police reached out. They reviewed the security footage. The man who made the withdrawal wore a baseball cap, dark glasses, a face mask that covered nearly everything. There was no way to identify him. But the SUV parked directly outside the bank was captured perfectly. The investigator looked at me. "Do you recognize this vehicle?" I stared at the screen. My throat tightened. It was the black SUV I had helped Jason buy 2 years earlier. I'd even contributed $15,000 toward the down payment. I knew that license plate. There was no chance I could mistake it. Even then, I refused to believe it. I kept making excuses. Maybe Jason had loaned the SUV to someone. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. I called him. He answered almost immediately. "Dad." "I'm in a meeting." I asked, "Where are you?" "Boston." "Why?" I hesitated. "Was your SUV in Chicago last night?" There was silence. Exactly 2 seconds. Then Jason laughed. "No, I drove it here." "Why are you asking?" I didn't answer. "It's nothing." Then I hung up. For the first time in nearly 40 years of being a father, I realized I was afraid of my own son. 3 days later, the forensic report arrived. The signature was confirmed to be forged. My documents had been copied illegally. Whoever carried out the fraud had possessed every piece of my personal information. The investigator looked directly at me, then asked quietly, "Mr. Carter, have you ever given your original documents to anyone?" I froze. In my mind, I saw Jason again, sitting at my kitchen table, smiling warmly. "Dad, let me take care of everything." That was the moment it finally hit me. This hadn't happened overnight. It had been planned for months, and the only person who had ever been given complete access to every document I owned was the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. My son. Jason Carter. I didn't sleep at all that night. The old clock on the wall kept ticking, second after second, while I sat alone staring at Grace's photograph. The same photograph that had rested on that shelf for 33 years. I looked into the eyes of the woman I had loved more than anyone, and quietly whispered, "Grace, did I fail him? Did I teach our son the wrong lessons?" The room offered no answer. The next morning, I drove to Jason's house. It was a beautiful mansion in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. I'd helped him with the down payment. The day he received the keys, he wrapped me in a hug and said, "One day, you'll move in with us, Dad." I believed him. I believed him so completely that I'd imagined spending the rest of my life inside that very house. Jason opened the front door. The moment he saw me, the smile disappeared from his face. "Dad, you should have called first." I walked inside. No shouting, no accusations. I simply placed the bank documents on the dining room table, then looked him in the eye. "Jason, is there something You want to tell me? He glanced at the papers. For a split second, the color drained from his face. Then, almost immediately, he regained his composure. I don't know what you're talking about. I reached into my folder, pulled out the security photo from the bank, placed it in front of him, then quietly said, That SUV belongs to you. Jason said nothing. Emily came downstairs. She looked at Jason, then at me. Confusion filled her face. What's going on? Before I could answer, Jason stood up. Emily, go upstairs. This is between my father and me. She didn't move. She stayed exactly where she was, as though, for the very first time, she realized something was terribly wrong. I looked directly at my son. My voice trembled. You took my money, didn't you? The room fell into complete silence. Nearly a full minute passed. Finally, Jason let out a long sigh, pulled out a chair, sat down, then said, Yeah. Just one word, spoken so casually, yet powerful enough to crush everything that remained of my heart. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I only asked, Why? Jason leaned forward, resting both hands on the table. I'll pay it back. I just needed it first. I stared at him. That money was my entire retirement. Jason shrugged. I invested it. The market had a huge opportunity. Just give it a few months. I'll make twice as much. I couldn't speak, because that wasn't an apology. It was an excuse. Do you know how many years I worked for that money? Every dollar came from sweat and sacrifice. Jason answered immediately. You're old, Dad. You don't need that much money. I still have my whole future ahead of me. I only borrowed it. I'll pay you back. I looked at the man sitting across from me. He was my son. Yet, somehow, he was no longer the little boy who used to cling to my leg, terrified of the dark. I didn't know when he'd changed, or perhaps I had simply never known who he truly was. Emily slowly turned toward him. Her voice shook. Jason? Are you serious? That money belonged to your father? Jason snapped. Stay out of this. Emily shook her head. You told me it was money from an investor. You never said it was your father's retirement. Jason slammed his hand against the table. I said I'll pay it back. That's the end of it. Emily took a step backward. Her face turned pale. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. Dad, I'm so sorry. It was the very first apology I heard that day, but it wasn't from the person I've been waiting for. 1 week later, the investment firm where Jason worked opened an internal investigation. They discovered he had used my retirement savings to cover massive investment losses. Months earlier, Jason had begun making high-risk trades. At first, he won. He made a fortune. It convinced him he was a financial genius. Then, the market turned. He lost almost everything, but instead of stopping, he borrowed more, invested more, kept believing one more deal would fix everything, until finally, no bank, no investor, no friend would lend him another dollar. That's when he remembered me. Not because I was his father, but because I was the last person who still had money. The bank refused to reimburse the loss. Every transaction appeared legitimate. Every document looked authentic. The criminal investigation would take months, perhaps years, but the money was already gone. Some of it had disappeared in failed investments. Some had gone to repay other debts. The rest, no one knew. 3 months later, I was forced to sell my house. Not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. I could no longer afford the remaining mortgage payments. The day I signed the closing papers, I stood quietly in the living room. That was where Jason had taken his very first steps. That was where Grace had laughed so many years ago. That was where our little family had once been truly happy. I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter, ran my hand across the wall one last time, then walked out without looking back. I moved into an old rental room, less than 200 square feet, an iron bed, an old fan, a tiny electric stove. That was all 35 years of work had left me with. To survive, I found a job, working the night shift as a parking lot security guard. Every evening, I'd put on an oversized uniform, walk between rows of luxury cars. Sometimes, I'd catch myself smiling. Some of those cars were worth more than every dollar I had left in the world. I never called Jason again, and he never called me. Emily sent a few messages, apologizing, checking on my health. I always replied, "I'm doing fine," because I refused to let my daughter-in-law carry the burden of the choices her husband had made. Time passed quietly. 1 year, then 2. Eventually, no one spoke about what had happened, until one freezing winter evening after I finished my shift and returned to my little apartment. 3 soft knocks echoed through the room. I opened the door. The man standing outside was no longer the Jason I remembered. His face was hollow. His eyes were bloodshot. His clothes were wrinkled. He looked as though life itself had crushed him. Then, without warning, he collapsed to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. "Dad? Please, help me. It's over. I have nowhere else to go." Jason remained on his knees, his head hanging low, his shoulders trembling with every breath. I had never seen my son like this. The expensive tailored suits were gone. The luxury watch, worth tens of thousands of dollars, had disappeared. The man kneeling before me was nothing more than a shadow of the son I once knew. I stepped aside. "Come in." Jason slowly looked up. Disbelief filled his eyes. Maybe he expected me to slam the door in his face, the same way he had once slammed shut the door to his own heart. But I didn't. Not because I'd forgotten what he'd done, but because I refused to become the kind of man he used to be. My tiny apartment contained little more than an old table, 2 worn-out chairs, and a kettle beginning to whistle. I poured him a cup of tea. He wrapped both hands around it. They shook so badly, the tea spilled over the rim. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then finally, Jason broke the silence. "I've lost everything." I said nothing. He continued. "I was fired. The banks are suing me. I lost the house. Emily divorced me." Each sentence fell between us, like another stone dropped into still water. I looked at my son. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of revenge, only a deep exhaustion, because none of those losses could give me back my retirement, my home, the 35 years I had spent saving every dollar, and certainly not Grace. Jason reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a hospital envelope. He placed it gently on the table. "I have end-stage kidney failure. I've been on dialysis 3 times a week. The doctors said if I don't get a transplant, I don't have much time left." I opened the file. I didn't need to read everything. The first few pages told me enough. Jason was telling the truth. His voice cracked. "I've already been placed on the transplant waiting list, but the doctor said it could take years. I don't have years." I remained silent. Jason lowered his head. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm terrified of dying." Just then, his phone rang.
Jason looked at the screen, then quietly silenced it. A few moments later, someone knocked on my door. It was Emily. She stepped inside, holding a paper bag filled with medication. The moment she saw me, she bowed deeply. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Even after all these years, she still called me Dad. Emily sat down quietly. "There is something you deserve to know." She unlocked her phone, then handed it to me. The screen was filled with emails, text messages, bank records, transaction histories. Emily spoke softly. "For years, I believed Jason had simply made bad investments. But after our divorce, I discovered the truth. He tried, more than once, to repay your money, but every time he recovered part of it, he wanted more. He believed one more successful investment would restore everything. Greed consumed him." Jason began to cry. For the first time since he was a little boy, I watched my son cry without shame. "Dad, I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I only wanted to say one thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for believing money mattered more than the man who gave me life. After Mom died, you never abandoned me, but I abandoned you when you needed me most." I turned toward the window. Rain slowly slid down the glass. I thought about Grace. If she were still alive, what would she do? Deep inside, I already knew. She would cry. She would be heartbroken, but she would never allow her son to die, consumed by regret. 1 week later, I walked into the hospital. The doctors performed every compatibility test imaginable. When the results came back, we were a match. The transplant surgeon looked at me. "Mr. Carter, have you thought this through? You're 68. This surgery carries real risks." I nodded. "I know. But I'm his father." Nothing more needed to be said. The day I signed the consent papers, Jason fell to his knees again, wrapped his arms around my legs, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, I don't deserve this." I rested my hand on his shoulder, then quietly answered, "You're right. There was a time when you didn't. But if I let you die today, I'd spend the rest of my life unable to forgive myself. Pain isn't healed by revenge. It only ends when someone chooses not to pass it on." The surgery was successful. 3 months later, Jason arrived using a cane to pick me up from the hospital. He wasn't the arrogant man he used to be. His hair was cut short, his face looked older, thinner, but his eyes held something I'd not seen in years. Honesty. He handed me a large envelope. Inside was a notarized agreement. Every month, a portion of his income would be transferred to me until every dollar he had stolen had been repaid. It might take 10 years, 15 years, maybe even longer. I knew I'd never truly recover everything I'd lost. But this time, what I saw wasn't money. It was a son who had finally learned to take responsibility for his choices. And in the end, that was worth more than any retirement account could ever be. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 68 years old. If you looked at old photographs of me, you probably wouldn't recognize the man I am today. Back then, I had thick black hair, a smile that rarely disappeared, and hands that hadn't yet been hardened by decades of calluses. Life has its own way of wearing a person down, not only through age, but through responsibility, and through sacrifices no one ever sees. I was born into a working-class family on the outskirts of Chicago. My father was a machinist. My mother worked in a garment factory. We weren't poor enough to go hungry, but we never knew what it felt like to have extra money. My father used to tell me, A real man never complains about hard work. The harder you work today, the easier life will be for your family tomorrow.
I grew up believing every word. At 19, I left school and started working full-time at a metal fabrication plant. The smell of machine oil, the pounding of hammers, steel crashing against steel, those sounds stayed with me for more than 3 decades. When I was 28, I met Grace. She was a nurse at the county hospital. Grace wasn't the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, but she was the kindest listener I'd ever known. On our very first date, I could only afford 2 cups of coffee. She smiled anyway. Then she said, "I don't need a rich man. I only need a man who never gives up." I still remember those words, even now. A year later, we got married. No expensive wedding, no honeymoon, no house of our own, just a tiny rented apartment and a promise. We'll build our future together. Those first years were incredibly difficult. During the day, I worked at the factory. At night, I delivered packages. On weekends, I repaired roofs, mowed lawns, took every odd job that could earn a few extra dollars. Grace often looked at me and said, "Michael, you need to rest." I'd just smile. Just a few more years, then everything will be okay. But life never waits until you're ready. When Jason turned 3, Grace was diagnosed with cancer. At first, we believed treatment would save her, that everything would be all right. But with every passing month, every round of chemotherapy, came another piece of bad news. The medical bills kept rising, Grace kept getting weaker, and I worked even harder. Some weeks I slept only 3, maybe 4 hours a night. I sold my first car, emptied every savings account we had, even mortgaged the little house we had worked so hard to buy, just hoping I could keep her with us a little longer. On her final night, Grace held my hand. Her fingers had grown so thin I could feel every bone beneath her skin. She looked toward the small bed where Jason was sleeping peacefully, then whispered, "If I'm gone, don't let him grow up without love. Don't let him ever feel like he lost both parents." I nodded, unable to speak. Grace gave me the gentlest smile. It was the last smile I'd ever see. The next morning, she was gone. Jason was only 5 years old. From that day on, I became both father and mother. Every morning I woke him up, made breakfast, drove him to school, then went to work. After my shift, I'd pick him up, cook dinner, do the laundry, read him bedtime stories. Some nights, Jason would wake up burning with fever. I'd sit beside his hospital bed until sunrise. At 6 in the morning, I'd change my clothes and head straight back to work, as if I'd slept all night. My friends often told me, "You should get married again. Jason needs a mother." I tried, twice, but every time I saw Jason quietly hugging Grace's photograph before going to sleep, I stopped. I was afraid. If I chose the wrong woman, my son would have to suffer all over again. So I made a decision. For the rest of my life, there would only be one person I lived for. Jason. I never missed one of his baseball games, one school performance, one graduation ceremony. No matter how exhausted I was always there. Even after working an overnight shift, with my clothes still smelling of machine oil, I'd stand in the back row, clapping louder than anyone else. One day, Jason threw his arms around me and said, "Dad, you're my hero." That one sentence was enough to erase every ache, every sleepless night, every sacrifice. As the years passed, my income slowly improved, but I never spent more than I had to. Every bonus, every overtime check, every weekend paycheck went directly into my retirement account. I always believed that one day, when I grew old, I would never become a burden to my son. I'd have a small house, a little garden, a rocking chair on the front porch. Every weekend, Jason would bring his wife and children to visit. We'd have dinner together, laugh together, tell the same old family stories over and over again. It was the simplest dream a father could ever have, and it was exactly why I spent 35 years saving every dollar I could. I had no idea that the very money I'd sacrificed my entire life to protect would one day become the reason everything I had ever built would come crashing down. 1 year later, Jason still came to visit me. Every weekend. The luxury cars were gone. The designer watches were gone. The $1,000 suits were gone too. Now he drove an old pickup truck, worked for a logistics company. During the day, he loaded freight. At night, he attended classes to earn back the professional certifications he had lost. Every month, he transferred a small payment into my bank account. The first time I sent it back, Jason shook his head. "Dad, I know. I'll never repay everything. But if I stop trying, I'll become the same man I used to be." From that day forward, I never refused another payment. Not because I needed the money, but because it was the way my son was learning to live with responsibility. Emily also began bringing her little daughter to visit me, my granddaughter. She had no idea what her father and grandfather had gone through. Every time she ran into my arms, she smiled brightly. "Grandpa, will you tell me a story?" I'd smile, lift her into my lap, and in those quiet moments, I finally understood something. If I'd chosen to hold on to hatred forever, I might have lost an entire generation. One afternoon, Jason and I visited Grace's grave together. We stood there for a long time. He laid a bouquet of flowers against the headstone, then slowly dropped to one knee. His voice trembled. "Mom, I made Dad live through the hardest years of his life. I know you can't forgive me, not yet, but I promise, from this day forward, I'll live my life in a way that makes me worthy of being your son." I didn't say a word. I simply rested my hand on his shoulder. For the first time in many years, we cried together. Not because of what we'd lost, but because, at long last, we had found our way back to each other. Someone once asked me, "If you could go back, would you still donate your kidney to your son?" I answered, yes. Not because he deserved it, but because I refused to let hatred decide the kind of man I would become. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. Forgiveness means making a choice not to let pain control the rest of your life. Some debts can never be repaid with money. Some wounds never completely heal, but every one of us has a choice. We can spend our lives holding on to resentment or find the courage to stop passing pain from one generation to the next. Perhaps that is the greatest inheritance any parent can ever leave behind. Thank you for staying with Veritale until the very end of today's story. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story about family, betrayal, forgiveness, and the life lessons hidden inside them. Share this story with the people you love, because sometimes the right story at the right moment can change the way someone sees their family forever. Every story leaves a lesson. Every lesson shapes a life. This is Veritale. Some children spend their entire lives being loved by their parents, and yet all it takes is a single signature to destroy the very person who gave them life. When I was 68 years old, I had nothing left. No home, no retirement savings, not a single dollar to my name. For 35 years, I woke up before sunrise, worked overtime, picked up weekend shifts. I never bought a new car, never took expensive vacations, never even allowed myself a single day off unless I absolutely had to. Every sacrifice, every dollar I saved, disappeared in one single morning. But losing the money wasn't the part that hurt the most. What broke me was discovering who had taken it. My only son, Jason. The little boy I held in my arms the day he was born. The child I promised my dying wife I would raise as both father and mother. I kept that promise for 38 years. He only needed a few minutes to betray me the day the bank called.
I thought they had made a mistake. The representative spoke politely. Mr. Michael Carter, your retirement account was fully withdrawn 3 days ago. I actually laughed. I've never touched that money. Silence, just for a few seconds. Then she answered, the withdrawal was approved with your signed authorization, along with a legally notarized power of attorney. My hands instantly turned cold because I had never signed any of those documents. 2 days later, the police finished their investigation. The signature had been forged, but whoever committed the fraud had legal access to every piece of my personal information. The bank's security cameras captured everything. A man wearing a baseball cap, a face mask, no clear view of his face. But the SUV parked outside the bank carried one unmistakable license plate. It belonged to my son, Jason. I drove straight to his house. I expected excuses, denials, maybe even tears. Instead, Jason calmly looked me in the eyes, without guilt, without regret, and said words that still echo inside my head, even today. I only borrowed it. You're old, Dad. You don't need that much money anymore. In that moment, I finally understood something. Some children don't suddenly become selfish. Money simply reveals who they truly were. All along I lost my house. I moved into a tiny rented room that barely fit a bed. During the day, I worked as a parking lot security guard. At night, I slept on an old metal bed that squeaked every time I turned over. At 68 years old, I had to rebuild my life from absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, Jason lived in a luxury home, purchased with my retirement savings. He drove expensive cars, posted pictures of lavish vacations, smiled in every photo as though he had never had a father. I believed I would carry that pain to my grave. Until one freezing winter night, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow knocks, each one more hesitant than the last. I opened the door. Standing there was Jason. He dropped to his knees, crying like the little boy I once carried in my arms. Then he looked up at me, with tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "Dad, please save me. It's too late. If you were in my place, could you forgive the person who stole your entire retirement and your future? Or perhaps one day you'll discover that some debts inside a family can never be repaid with money, only with an entire lifetime